America News. Trump or Biden? The U.S. appears poised to maintain high import tariffs. Washington, Clips and Clamps Industries, a Michigan auto supplier, lost many contracts due to Donald Trump's 25% tariff on foreign steel, which raised material prices and made it tougher to compete with overseas rivals. After Joe Biden became president, firm President Jeff Asnavorian expected relief. However, Biden maintained Trump's tariffs on steel, aluminum, and many Chinese imports. It was a little surprised that an ideologically different government would preserve the policies so intact, Asnavorian said, recalling Bill Clinton's fight for freer trade. That's so different from a 2024 Biden government. Trump and Biden disagree on taxation, climate change, immigration, and regulation. Both presumed presidential nominees have taken surprising similar trade policy positions. Whether Biden or Trump wins, the U.S. will likely retain a protectionist trade stance, which analysts fear might fuel inflation. Last week, Biden proposed fresh taxes on Chinese electric vehicles, sophisticated batteries, solar cells, and other products to prevent Beijing from flooding the U.S. with cheap imports. The two presidential candidates' protectionist views reflect the common belief that greater imports, especially from China, killed American manufacturing jobs and companies. It's a hot political matter in Midwestern industrial states that will likely decide the White House. Former trade official William Reinsch, now at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, said, "If you look at the election, it's obvious. The determining states are where? Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Trade will be huge." The two candidates have rejected the U.S. commitment to basically frictionless commerce, few barriers and little government meddling, that underpinned American policy for decades after World War II. The premise was that free trade would lower prices and help consumers and businesses worldwide. In recent years, the view emerged that free trade benefited people and companies but damaged workers, with cheaper foreign labor replacing American jobs. The previously practically universal Washington consensus on free trade is dead, Trump's senior trade negotiator Robert Lighthizer wrote in No Trade is Free in 2023. Trade protectionism, like free trade, costs money. It can raise consumer and company prices as the nation struggles to control inflation. It supports inefficient firms. It provokes international backlash against American exporters. It usually ruins relations with allies and foes. Trump, who proudly called himself Tariff Man, targeted America's trading partners with import fees to reduce trade deficits, notably with China. Trump pressured Mexico and Canada to rewrite a North American trade treaty he said had killed U.S. manufacturing jobs. He also got China to buy more American agriculture goods. His administration didn't restore manufacturing or reduce trade deficits, and factory jobs are now a lower share of U.S. employment. Trump promises more of the same in a second term. His threat is a 10% tariff on all imports and a 60% charge on Chinese goods. "I call it a ring around the country," Trump told Time. Moody's Analytics head economist Mark Zandi warns of dire consequences. Zandi said Trump's tariffs would generate greater inflation, lower GDP and jobs and increase unemployment, all else equal. Zandi believes that import taxes will raise average consumer prices by 0.7 percentage points a year. Kimberly Clausing and Mary Lovely of the Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated Monday that Trump's tariff ideas would cost middle-class families at least $1,700 a year. Biden supports subsidizing chip making and EV production to boost their competitiveness. It shows concern that China's military and technical power threatens America's security. Last week's announcement suggested Biden supports further tariffs. In preparation for more measures against Beijing, his chief trade negotiator, Catherine Tai, has begun a probe into Chinese shipbuilding trade practices. The laissez-faire economic model of trade wasn't working for the U.S., said Tai senior advisor Elizabeth Baltson. "We want to fix it. The steps you take to make the economy fairer may be protectionist. I think you should ask what you're protecting: working-class neighborhoods." Harvard economist Danny Roderick, an early skeptic of globalization in the 1990s and 2000s, prefers Biden's trade policies to Trump's. Roderick said Trump's trade restrictions on China were knee-jerk and nonsensical, with little evidence they helped workers or the middle class. In contrast, Biden's approach is strategic and based on restoring U.S. manufacturing capacity and investing in the green transition, so genuinely boosting the U.S. economy rather than crude protectionism. In recent years, a consensus evolved that U.S. trade policy needed to reform. Critics claim moving plants to low-wage countries like Mexico and China in the 1990s and early 2000s boosted corporate profits and enriched executives and investors but decimated American factory communities that couldn't compete with imports. In 2016, top MIT economist David Autor and two colleagues found that inexpensive Chinese imports cost 2.4 million American jobs from 1999 to 2011. Recently, China's growth as America's top geopolitical foe has spurred a bipartisan push to minimize America's dependence on Beijing for medications and rare earth minerals for electric cars and telephones. This policy shift may have begun with Trump, but anger with free trade and a more aggressive China has been growing for years. Trump abandoned an Obama-negotiated free trade agreement with 11 Pacific Rim nations as soon as he took office. Then Trump took off. He taxed solar panels and foreign washing machines. Next, he imposed taxes on steel and aluminum imports as national security threats. He tariffed $360 billion of Chinese goods for Beijing's cyber theft and other illegal efforts to overcome U.S. technological supremacy, starting arguably the greatest trade war since the 1930s. China responded with retaliatory taxes, targeting American farmers to undermine Trump's rural base. What did Trump's tariff battle accomplish? Autor and colleagues at Zurich, Harvard, and the World Bank found that Trump's import levies failed to repatriate jobs to the U.S. heartland. When meant to protect jobs, the tariffs neither enhanced nor diminished U.S. employment, the study found. Even worse, China and other nations' retaliatory duties on U.S. commodities had negative employment implications, especially for farmers. Trump gave farmers billions in government aid to ease their agony, but just barely. The Trump tariffs hurt enterprises that used affected supplies. Clips and Clamps in Plymouth, Michigan, imports little steel. It suffered because the tariffs allowed American steelmakers to hike prices. Our raw material prices in the U.S. are 20% higher than Europe and Mexico and 40% to 60% more than China, Asnavorian said. He claimed his overseas competitors have much lower costs. Politics triumphed over policy in Trump's trade battle. Autor found that Trump and Republicans running for Congress gained support in the industrial Midwest and manufacturing-heavy southern states like North Carolina and Tennessee, which were most affected by import tariffs. Biden kept many of Trump's trade ideas and didn't resurrect Obama's Pacific Rim trade accord. He maintained Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs but let some trading partners dodge them until they hit a quota. He kept China tariffs. Beijing faced additional pressure from Biden when he restricted its access to innovative computer chips and their manufacturing facilities. Trade and national security are one, Reinsch said. This is the first time we've faced an economic and security threat. The Soviet Union posed a security hazard but not an economic threat. A friend, Japan was an economic threat in the 1980s but never a security threat. It's been difficult to deal with China being both. Lovely said Biden's China policy are based on national security at Peterson. That makes it harder to critique since national security is always a black box only the highest security clearance can view. The Biden administration's subsidies for U.S. manufacturing have angered certain friends. Electric car buyers can get a $7,500 tax credit under Biden's 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. The credit only applies to North American-made EVs. Only EVs with at least 60% North American battery parts and 50% U.S. or free trade deal-sourced critical minerals like cobalt, copper, and lithium receive full credit. It's crucial that the United States establish its own renewable energy sector, in conjunction with its friends and partners, thereby avoiding becoming dependent on Chinese technologies, said Asia Society Policy Institute Vice President Wendy Cutler, a former U.S. trade negotiator. In a militarized trade, the U.S. shouldn't rely too much on China for strategic products.